I have more of a practical question about actual photography. So you talked about the months of research you do before you go out on a shoot for a project. When you're doing that research, are you conceptualizing different compositions that you go out and then you have a list of shots that you're looking to get, or do you go out and kind of wing it and just kind of collect shots as they come? Because it differs. I know I have friends that shoot massive volumes of photos, and then I have other friends that will go out, get 10 photos and come back because they've conceptualized those 10 perfect shots and they get those. So I was just wondering what kind of your approach was to that.
Claire?
Can I just
Oh, you start.
So basically it's a process. When you're working on a story, you have to visualize how it's going to turn out. So, and the research is basically, I mean, if you're collaborating with a writer, I think the writer would be a good resource to collaborate with, and a bit of Googling and stuff. And also thinking of possible visual situations that you can photograph. So if you're especially working in a very specific time frame, I think it makes sense for you to note down and create a storyboard, so as to say, of what the visual situations that you could perhaps photograph. But of course, that's never going to be the case in reality. So once you're on the field, you have more and more opportunities. You perhaps come up with greater pictures than you imagined you might come back with. So that's always an advantage, and as far as my experience goes, I've always been happy about the result, because it's a little more than what you've always imagined it to be. So I think structuring your approach to a story definitely helps. You need to have a brief about the story, which either if you're on an assignment, you get it from your photo editor or an editor, and then you start collaborating with a writer who obviously brings in a very different, perhaps a non-visual element to that story. And as a photographer, what you try and do is illustrate what the writer is going to talk about, and not really take an abstract tangent into something that people perhaps won't understand. So it helps, and I think I'm more leaning towards making those set of possible visual imagery that you could perhaps explore, and you'll definitely have more than that. Yeah.
The gentleman in the green shirt.
Two parts question. One, perhaps we've touched on in bits and pieces the evolution of photography as such with science, with the various mediums that we've got at our disposal today. I do remember as a kid, we'd get photograph ration when we went out on holidays, and that's where perhaps mom or dad visualized the photograph before they took it, and whereas now we go trigger happy and snap photographs. So do you see the art of photography itself as being diluted or polluted, perhaps because now we don't have to worry about film processing and so forth? And secondly, I like the variety in the panel here, and perhaps most of you have been around longer than I have in Bangalore. I've been born and brought up in Bangalore, lived around Malleshwaram, and then moved to the north of Bangalore. And after a long time, when I went back to Malleshwaram, I felt violated that there was all this, the core of what I related to Malleshwaram with was no more the same. It was being encroached by these big malls, as well as these other shops. What is the basic feeling that each of you have of what you've seen Bangalore as it were perhaps 20, 30 years ago, as it is now, as was mirrored by this gentleman here? He felt sorry for it. What are your singular thoughts on that?
Your first question. When I started working as a photographer, it was with film, and here in Bangalore, and we were given very strict limitations of how many pictures that we could take. And I remember one client saying, 2 rolls of film, Claire, that's it. And you know, so there's full tension, each shot counts. And but I think that was a very good education for me to go through, and I think that it was a very disciplined way of doing photography. You couldn't waste a single shot, because you knew that you had to get the story, or you had to absolutely get it within those 2 rolls of film. And when I turned digital, I thought, way, I can just shoot thousands and millions, and you know. And my shots were rubbish. And then I thought to myself, go back to what it was, make every shot count, and don't just keep clicking. And so even now, I don't crop, and I don't do very much Photoshop, because having had that discipline of getting the light right, getting the composition right, I still shoot in that way.
Yeah, very briefly once again, I'll try and keep it hard.
I tried to beat Roy there with my question.
Sorry?
I said I tried to beat Roy there with, you know, the verbosity of my question.
Okay, like you just said, everyone's got a camera nowadays, and I know some photographers take a lot of pictures, and most of them look fantastic, and I know other photographers take lots of pictures, and most of them look crap. But I think it boils down to what you have to say and how you want to say it. If you're shooting for a client, you know what the client wants. So you try and get him what he wants, because he's paying you his money. If you're doing something more personal, then you're trying to maybe say something or quantify something which is more intangible, which might cause a reaction in an audience. So you make your choices depending on what you have to say, I think.
The photography, the craft of photography may seem diluted right now, is the underline it, but it'll all, you know, kind of settle down. And as it's just starting, I mean, digital revolution has begun, and you know, everybody is going crazy. At Kadlekai Parishe, there were 100,000 people, and they were trying to get in to see the God inside the temple. They were on the public address system. People were, the people of the temple were saying, "Come on, don't keep photographing the God. You have to come here to take darshan. Just go." You know, that was a big problem, because everybody was standing and shooting pictures. That's okay, but professionally speaking, yeah, it's going through a thing, but it'll kind of subside. It'll kind of come to a calm plane at some point in time, I guess. Secondly, about the change, yeah, but you know, I've seen the change in the last 25 years. I've lived in Malleshwaram too. But change is inevitable. Change, you know, we can't really cry about it. But what I'm more worried about is the decay of the city, you know, in physical, emotional, individual, you know, planes. It's decaying, so that worries me.
Yeah, I'd like to quickly add, you know, development is definitely a two-sided coin, but as long as we have compassion towards our, you know, city dwellers, I think we are fine. I mean, I'm really not against these malls or big apartment complexes, as long as we don't jeopardize the livelihood with someone else. You know, as long as we have a concern and compassion, like I said, I think we're good to go.
I actually don't agree with that. I mean, which is to say, what I'm trying to say is that cities have limited resources, and by the look of it, unlimited number of people coming to our cities. So whether we like it or not, whether we have compassion or not, there's going to be a battle over these resources. There's only so much electricity, there's only so much water. So in an ideal world, in a utopic world, there will be enough food and water and employment for everyone. But that isn't the case in India, as we can see.
Brian, I think we'll take it outside.
I just have one point to make on this whole nostalgia discussion that's going on. Personal example, my mom studied in Shimla, and after 40 years, she went back to see her old school. And she had the same violent reaction of, you know, just not finding what she had grown up with, and she saddened, depressed, and, you know. So change, like Mahesh repeatedly said, is inevitable, and that's happening all around us. It's happening all over the world. And once man gets to other planets and other places, change will happen there also. But the point is, I think nostalgia for many of us has become a bit of an indulgence. We sort of sit in our homes, over a coffee or a beer or whatever, and sort of fantastically talk about it. What I would think is that, yes, we are all, probably when we have more money, we also have more time to be nostalgic. But in one way to do it is to personally, in our own individual lives, homes, probably through photography, to try and conserve to whatever extent that we know of our own old culture. Or let's say I will not shop in a mall if I don't need to. I will still buy my vegetables from a local vendor. Or I will not use gallons of water to clean the car that I see happening every day next to my house. So, these are little ways in which we can all conserve the city that we knew or we know or we love. And it will all add up. For example, in Lal Bagh, there has been the Morning Walkers Association has put a stop to the parking lot which is coming inside Lal Bagh. So those are community, initiatives and individual initiatives which will all add up to, keeping the city what we want it to be to that extent. But having said that, change is inevitable.
I'm an old resident of Bangalore, though I grew up in Delhi. And I believe that change has to come, but it could have come in a planned fashion. And I'm sorry, but I'm drowning in nostalgia. I still live in a 100-year-old house in the center of the city. I go to Russell Market to shop. I hate the malls. I go to Commercial Street. I'm more fascinated with Commercial Street than I am to Garuda Mall. So I do believe that we have to accept that change has to come, but it could still come in a planned fashion. And I think it's people like you who have a social responsibility to see that the city does not get more raped. I mean, use that word.
I think, just to be more clear, to see that our city does not get more raped. So if you look at the topography of Bangalore, like with cantonment, and then you compare it with, say, Pete, areas on the outskirts, if you will, which haven't necessarily had a British eye on, let's say, the building of the city, you see the roads are just wide enough for a horse cart, say, or a bullock cart, so on and so forth. Now that aesthetic is moving into cantonment. So whether it's our passport office, if you look at the architecture, or whether it's all our new office buildings, which are all steel glass and nothing much else, very, very ugly. It hurt the aesthetic which exists in Bangalore, but it's still something which is moving in overwhelming fashion, in hundreds of little ways. So it is distressing. It might cause one distress, but it is part and parcel of the movement of this city, of the history of this place.
Chris?
When does a photograph become a work of art? Is it purely technique?
Amazing question. Thank you. For me personally, I think it becomes a work of art when it becomes an object of value to humanity. In some regards, which means I don't like abstract expressionism personally. I don't like Mr. Pollock. I don't like art which is about the self, which is how I feel. But I like Renaissance art, for example. I like Nicolas Poussin, where you have a painting of this meadow, and all these artists, all these shepherds are looking at a little plaque which says, "I live in paradise also," written in Latin, which is that no matter what the milieu is, what the photograph is, the potential for using it in whatever direction exists.
I think it becomes a work of art when it induces some, as I said, some feeling, some thought, in the viewer. It could be on the wall, it could be in a book. That's not important, but that's what I feel.
Frank doesn't agree with any of us with that.
Can I say something?
What is the morality of photography? In my view, I think it's all for the Justin Biebers and the Kim Kardashians to make pictures and put them up on Twitter. So, like you mentioned, in a post-apocalyptic scenario, we understand that these for the reasons, the narcissistic reasons for demise. Okay? What do you think is the morality of photograph? Yeah, that's question one. The other one is photographs, for the most part, to me, I study painting. They seem very illustrative. Like if I take my vicious picture, the juxtaposition is like an illustration of contradictions. And somehow I think the conversation transferred into a city conversation, megapolis, metropolis conversation. Is there photography beyond illustration?
Yeah, there is photography beyond illustration, and it, but as an artist, I don't have to do because it is there. I do what I want to say. I'm very clear about what I want to say. That's okay. There is photography beyond illustration. Maybe what Ryan did, or what he has done, there are quite a few others who have done it. Of course, there is. And what was your first question? Morality in terms of what? I'm like, when you're shooting a city or invading on privacy or shooting a calamity, is that what you mean? Shooting myself? Okay, I think. Right.
I really like your question, first of all, and it's a question which I wish more people would ask today. And just to give you as clear an answer as possible, I think the morality lies with the photographer. It's not necessarily with the photograph he makes. It lies with what he has to say and why he wants to say it. So today, if you look at Indian photography, you look at Flickr, say, or you look at Facebook, you see 10,000 of the same pictures. You see 10,000 butterflies, 5,000 people standing in front of new cars, so on and so forth. They reveal our society for what it is, for better or for worse. But then again, if you look at the history of photography, of art, since you studied painting, why do certain artists float to the surface across time and across the ether, across space and time? Why are some people remembered? And I'd like to think it's because somehow they've allowed something to flow through them which has created something enduring and of value to humanity. Something you or I or anyone, a guy from Pete or Cantonment, would find emphasis by looking at it, who can relate to it.
Does that answer? Yeah, Veer.
What do you feel about the responsibility? Even certain questions that have been asked in this room have kind of thrust a sense of responsibility onto you. How do you feel about that? That you can say, I'm just taking a picture, and now, what happens with that picture? I don't know. What is it? What response is it incite? Does it save this building? Does it get it knocked down? I mean, what do you feel like your responsibility as a photographer is?
I'll take that question. I think it basically depends on the context. I think as a photojournalist, I think your task is pretty cut out. You're given a brief about, let's say the evacuation of the slum dwellers at Ijipura, which is a pertinent issue in Bangalore right now. So, I'm not trying to make a statement. I'm not trying to be an activist. I'm not trying to be a part of the scene. I'm not trying to be a voice of the people. All I'm trying to do is illustrate that this is what is happening. I'm trying to be as objective as possible when it comes to such a scenario. On the other hand, if I'm going there on my own, I would do my own research. I would talk to people there, maybe a couple of people, as much as my time lets me to talk to them. So I think there I'm slightly shifting focus. I'm not trying to illustrate an article. I'm not trying to illustrate a news piece which is going to go on the front page of the Times of India tomorrow. But as a voice of the people, So I think the context is very important, and I'm personally I'm quite comfortable shifting from being a photojournalist to be a blogger, to be an activist, depending on how I feel about that issue.
I think I shoot the same way, whether I'm shooting for a magazine or for my own book project or whatever, my blog or But Ryan said many times, and I keep saying it when I talk to students of photography, saying that what is important is what you want to say, So and that once that is clear, then everything else falls into. Sometimes there is responsibility. If you're shooting a disaster, then there is a very different way of being detached and photographing it. And if you're shooting something else, then you shoot in a slightly different way. So, but in your mind. But as long as you know what you want to say, the things are clear.
I was working exactly